The small town of Pine Ridge was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names. Nestled in the foothills of Colorado, it was surrounded by towering mountains that seemed to touch the sky. The air was crisp, and the forests were thick, with pines that whispered secrets when the wind blew through them. It was a peaceful place, the kind of town where nothing much happened until the day the teenagers disappeared. 15 years ago, 5 friends decided to spend their weekend hiking in the nearby mountains. Ethan Brooks, Lucas Grayson, Emily, Dawson Olivia Hart, and Ryan Miller were ordinary kids. They weren't adventurers or thrill seekers. They were just teenagers looking for a break from schoolwork and chores. Their plan was simple: pack some snacks, bring their backpacks, and enjoy the fresh air while exploring the trails. It was supposed to be an easy hike, one that would take no more than 2 days. But something went terribly wrong. On Friday afternoon, the group set off with smiles on their faces and excitement in their voices. Their families waved goodbye, expecting to see them again by Sunday evening. Laura Dawson, Emily's mother, had hugged her daughter tightly before she left. "Be careful, okay?" she said, smoothing Emily's hair. Emily rolled her eyes, but promised she would. None of them could have imagined it would be the last time they saw the group. When Sunday came and went without a word from the hikers, concern began to spread through Pine Ridge. At first, people assumed the teens had simply lost track of time or decided to extend their trip. But as hours turned into days, worry grew into panic. Search parties were organized. Volunteers scoured the trails and helicopters flew overhead, scanning the dense forests for any sign of the missing group. Flyers with their pictures were posted all over town, and news outlets picked up the story, turning it into a statewide mystery. Despite everyone's efforts, no trace of the 5 friends was ever found. Weeks passed, then months, and eventually years. The search teams disbanded, the flyers faded in the sun, and life in Pine Ridge slowly returned to normal, or at least as normal as it could be with such a haunting, unanswered question hanging over the town. For Laura Dawson, though, life never felt the same. Every morning she woke up hoping against hope that today would be the day she'd hear something about her daughter. She kept Emily's room exactly as it had been on the day she left, a shrine to the girl who might still be out there somewhere. Time has a way of dulling pain, but it doesn't erase it completely. As the years went by, Laura learned to live with the emptiness inside her. She threw herself into work at the local library, finding comfort in the routine of shelving books and helping patrons. Still, there were moments when the ache hit her so hard she couldn't breathe. Holidays were the worst. Christmas mornings without Emily opening presents, birthdays celebrated quietly instead of with laughter and cake. It was all too much sometimes. Then 15 years after the disappearance, something strange happened. A severe drought swept through Colorado, drying up rivers and reservoirs across the region. One of those reservoirs was located near the very spot where the teens had gone missing. As water levels dropped, long submerged parts of the landscape began to emerge. Trees that had been underwater for decades stood bare and skeletal, their branches reaching toward the sky like ghostly hands. And among the mud and debris, people started finding things that shouldn't have been there. It began with shoes. Someone walking along the edge of the reservoir noticed a pair of sneakers half buried in the dirt. Then came backpacks, water bottles, and even pieces of clothing. Word spread quickly, and soon locals flocked to the area, curious about what else might surface. Among the crowd was Laura Dawson. When she heard about the discoveries, she felt a shiver run down her spine. Something deep inside her told her she needed to see it for herself. Standing at the edge of the dried-up reservoir, Laura stared at the muddy expanse before her. Her heart pounded as she watched people sift through the debris, holding up items for others to examine. Some of the objects looked familiar, too familiar. A red jacket caught her eye, its fabric torn and faded, but unmistakably the same one Emily had worn on her hike. Nearby, someone held up a flashlight encrusted with dirt, its brand matching the one Ethan's parents had bought him for his birthday. Laura's hands trembled as she reached for an old photo tucked into her pocket. In it, the 5 friends grinned at the camera, their arms slung around each other's shoulders. She compared the image to the items scattered around her, her breath catching in her throat. These weren't random belongings, they belonged to the missing hikers. There was no doubt in her mind now. Somehow this reservoir was connected to what happened to her daughter. As she wandered closer to the waterline, Laura spotted something sticking out of the mud. Kneeling down, she brushed away the dirt to reveal a leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and brittle, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. Flipping it open, she saw handwriting, scribbles and sketches that sent chills racing down her spine. One entry read, "We're lost. The map doesn't match anything we've seen. Something's wrong." Another warned, "Don't go into the caves. Whatever is down there, it's not natural." Laura clutched the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. This was proof that her daughter had been here, proof that she hadn't, vanished into thin air. But it also raised terrifying questions. What had happened to the group? Where had they gone? And why had their things ended up buried beneath the reservoir? That night, Laura sat alone in her living room, poring over the journal by lamplight. Each page revealed fragments of the teens' final days, their growing fear, their confusion, their desperate attempts to find their way back home. One passage mentioned hearing strange noises at night, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. Another described seeing lights moving in the distance, flickering like fireflies but too steady to be natural. Laura's thoughts raced as she tried to make sense of it all. Could the teens have stumbled upon something dangerous? Something no one had thought to look for during the original search? The idea gnawed at her, refusing to let her rest. By the time dawn broke, she had made up her mind. She wasn't going to wait any longer for answers. If the truth lay hidden beneath the reservoir, she would find it herself, but she couldn't do it alone. The next morning, she visited Daniel Carter, a retired geologist who had lived in Pine Ridge for as long as she could remember. Daniel was older now, his hair streaked with gray, but he still had a sharp mind and a wealth of knowledge about the area's geography. When Laura showed him the journal and explained what she wanted to do, he hesitated. Exploring unknown cave systems was risky business, especially for amateurs, but after seeing the determination in her eyes, he nodded. "If you're serious about this," he said, "then I'll help you." Together they began gathering supplies, flashlights, ropes, helmets, and anything else they might need for a journey into the unknown. Laura knew it wouldn't be easy, but she didn't care. For the first time in 15 years, she had a lead, a real, tangible clue that might finally bring her closer to her daughter. No matter what dangers awaited her in those caves, she was ready to face them. Because even after all this time, one thing remained clear. Laura Dawson wasn't giving up on Emily. Not now, not ever. The morning sun was just beginning to rise over Pine Ridge when Laura Dawson and Daniel Carter set out for the dried-up reservoir. The air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of pine needles and damp earth. Laura clutched a backpack tightly against her chest, its weight both comforting and daunting. Inside were supplies they had carefully gathered: flashlights, water bottles, notebooks, and a camera. She felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her: hope, fear, and an overwhelming sense of urgency. This was the closest she had come to finding answers in 15 years, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in her way. When they arrived at the site, the scene was chaotic. People milled about, some digging through the mud with sticks, while others took pictures of strange objects they had uncovered. Laura scanned the area, her eyes darting from one item to the next: shoes, backpacks, pieces of clothing. It all seemed so ordinary, yet each object carried a weight that made her heart ache. These weren't just random belongings. They were pieces of lives interrupted, fragments of memories frozen in time. Daniel knelt beside a pile of debris, examining a tattered map he had found half buried in the dirt. "This is interesting," he muttered, holding it up for Laura to see. The map was old, its edges frayed and ink smudged, but certain landmarks were still visible. Trails, rivers, and mountains were marked clearly, along with handwritten notes scrawled in the margins. One note stood out: "Hollow Mountain, Stay away. Beneath it, someone had drawn a crude symbol resembling a spiral surrounded by jagged lines. What does it mean? Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel frowned. I'm not sure, but Hollow Mountain sounds familiar. There are local legends about a cave system in these parts, hidden deep underground. Some say it's cursed. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. Cursed or not, the idea of a hidden cave system intrigued her. If the teens had discovered such a place, it might explain why they vanished without a trace. She glanced around, noticing more clues scattered across the muddy landscape. A journal lay open near the waterline, its pages fluttering in the breeze. Someone had already flipped through it, leaving it behind like trash. Laura picked it up, skimming the entries until she found something that made her stomach twist. In shaky handwriting. One entry read, "We're not alone. Something is watching us. I can feel it." Another said, "Lucas thinks we should keep moving, but Olivia says we should stay put. Ethan keeps looking over his shoulder like he expects something to jump out at us." The last entry was the most chilling of all. "If anyone finds this, tell my mom I'm sorry. Tell her I tried." Laura closed the journal, her hands trembling. Whoever wrote this knew they were in trouble. They had been scared, confused, and desperate. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together what might have happened. Had the group stumbled upon something dangerous? Or had they made a wrong turn and gotten lost in the caves? Daniel noticed her pale face and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll figure it out," he said gently. "Let's keep looking." As they explored further, they began to notice patterns. Many of the items they found were clustered together, as if the teens had set up camp before continuing their journey. Near one cluster, they discovered a rock with strange carvings etched into its surface. The symbols matched the ones drawn on the map, spirals surrounded by jagged lines. Laura ran her fingers over the grooves, feeling their rough texture. "Do you think this is a warning?" she asked. "It could be," Daniel replied. "Or it might be a marker, pointing the way to something important." They continued searching until they reached the edge of the reservoir, where the ground sloped downward into darkness. A gaping hole yawned before them, partially obscured by fallen rocks and tangled roots. It looked like the entrance to a cave, though it was difficult to tell how far it extended. Laura stared into the abyss, her heart pounding. This was it, the gateway to whatever secrets lay buried beneath the earth. "We need to go in," she said firmly. Daniel hesitated. "It's not safe. We don't know what's down there." "I don't care," Laura shot back. "My daughter is somewhere in there. I can feel it." Reluctantly, Daniel agreed. Together, they prepared to enter the cave, strapping on helmets and turning on their flashlights. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing walls slick with moisture and sharp rocks jutting out like teeth. The air smelled musty, heavy with the scent of decay. As they stepped inside, Laura felt a wave of unease wash over her. It was as if the cave itself was alive, breathing quietly around them. The passageway twisted and turned, leading them deeper, into the earth. Every step echoed loudly, bouncing off the walls and filling the space with an eerie symphony. Laura kept her eyes peeled for any sign of the missing teens, calling out their names every few minutes. Her voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the vast emptiness. After what felt like hours, they came across a narrow tunnel blocked by a pile of rubble. Daniel examined it closely, tapping the stones with his flashlight. "This looks recent," he said, like something or someone tried to seal it off. Laura's heart skipped a beat. "Do you think they're still alive?" "It's possible," Daniel admitted, "but we won't know unless we clear it." Working together, they began removing the rocks one by one, careful not to cause a collapse. It was slow, painstaking work, but neither of them complained. Each stone they moved brought them closer to the truth. Finally, after what felt like forever, they managed to create a small opening wide enough to crawl through. Laura went first, squeezing herself into the tight space. On the other side, she found herself in a larger chamber illuminated by faint greenish light. The source of the glow became clear as she looked around. The walls were covered in patches of bioluminescent, moss casting an otherworldly hue over everything. In the center of the room stood a makeshift campsite, complete with blankets, empty food wrappers, and a rusted camping stove. Laura's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the place where the teens had spent their final days. She approached the campsite cautiously, her flashlight sweeping across the area. Among the debris, she spotted a pair of glasses lying on the ground. Picking them up, she recognized them instantly. They belonged to Ryan Miller. Nearby, she found a necklace with a charm shaped like a star. It had been Emily's favorite piece of jewelry. Tears welled up in Laura's eyes as she clutched the necklace tightly. Her daughter had been here. She had survived for a while at least. Daniel joined her, his expression grim. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a series of scratches etched into the wall. They formed words written in shaky handwriting. "Help us." Beneath it, another message read, "Don't trust the whispers." "What whispers?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know," Daniel admitted. "But we should be careful. Whatever scared them might still be here." They searched the chamber thoroughly, finding more clues that painted a picture of the teens' final days. A notebook contained frantic sketches of tunnels and symbols, along with notes about hearing strange noises at night. Another page described seeing shadows moving in the dark, faster than anything human. The entries grew increasingly erratic, filled with paranoia and despair. Laura sat down on a rock, overwhelmed by what she had learned. The teens had been trapped here, terrified and alone. They had tried to escape, but failed. And now, 15 years later, she was standing in the same place, hoping against hope that her daughter might still be alive. "We need to keep going," she said finally, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "If there's even a chance Emily is still out there, I have to find her." Daniel nodded, his resolve matching hers. Together they pressed onward, following the markings left behind by the teens. The deeper they went, the colder the air became and the louder. The hum of silence grew. It was as if the cave itself was trying to warn them, urging them to turn back. But Laura refused to listen. For 15 long years, she had waited for answers. Now, standing on the brink of discovery, she was ready to face whatever lay ahead, even if it meant confronting the unimaginable. The deeper Laura Dawson and Daniel Carter ventured into the cave, the more the world above seemed like a distant memory. The air grew colder with every step, and the faint green glow of bioluminescent moss was their only source of light aside from their flashlights. The walls were slick with moisture, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the tunnels, creating an unsettling rhythm that matched the pounding in Laura's chest. She clutched her flashlight tightly, its beam cutting through the darkness, like a knife. Every shadow seemed to move just out of the corner of her eye, and the silence between their footsteps felt heavy, as though the cave itself was holding its breath. They followed the markings left by the teens, symbols carved into rocks, arrows scratched into the dirt, and scraps of fabric tied to jagged outcroppings. It was clear the group had tried to leave a trail, either for rescuers or for themselves in case they needed to retrace their steps. But something about the symbols made Laura uneasy. They weren't random scratches. They were deliberate, almost ritualistic. Some of them matched the ones she'd seen on the map and the rock near the reservoir, but others were unfamiliar, spiral patterns surrounded by what looked like claw marks. The deeper they went, the more frequent these symbols became, as if the teens had been trying to warn others about something lurking ahead. "Do you think they knew what they were doing?" Laura asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Daniel shook his head. "I don't know. These symbols, they look like they're meant to keep something out. Or maybe to trap it." Laura shivered at the thought. She didn't want to believe the legends Daniel had mentioned earlier, that the caves were cursed or guarded by some ancient spirit. But the evidence was hard to ignore. The teens' notes talked about hearing whispers, seeing shadows, and feeling watched. Whatever had happened to them, it wasn't just bad luck or getting lost. Something had been down here with them. As they moved forward, the tunnel opened into another chamber, larger than the one they had found before. This room was different. It wasn't just empty space. In the center stood a massive stone structure shaped like a spiral staircase that led downward into darkness. The carvings on its surface were intricate and strange, depicting figures with elongated limbs and hollow eyes. At the base of the structure, Laura spotted something that made her heart stop. A backpack. It was torn and covered in dirt, but the name stitched onto the side was unmistakable: Emily Dawson. Laura rushed toward it, dropping to her knees as she pulled it open. Inside were a few crumpled wrappers, a broken flashlight, and a small notebook. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. Most of it was unreadable, smeared with mud and water damage, but one entry stood out. "It's not safe here. We can't leave. It won't let us." Beneath it, someone had written, "Ethan says we have to make a choice. Stay or go. I don't know what he means." "What does this mean?" Laura whispered, clutching the notebook to her chest. "What choice?" Daniel knelt beside her, examining the stone structure. "This might be it," he said, his voice low. "Whatever scared them, it's probably down there." Laura stared at the spiral staircase, her mind racing. She wanted to turn back, to get as far away from this place as possible, but the thought of leaving without answers and without Emily was unbearable. Taking a deep breath, she stood up. "We have to go down." Daniel hesitated. "It's dangerous. We don't even know what's waiting for us." "I don't care," Laura replied firmly. "If my daughter is down there, I'm going to find her." Reluctantly, Daniel nodded. Together, they began descending the spiral staircase, their flashlights casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The air grew colder with each step, and the hum of silence became louder, almost deafening. It was as if the cave was alive, pressing in around them, watching their every move. Laura could feel her pulse racing, her breath coming in short, shallow bursts. She tried to focus on the task at hand, reminding herself why she was here. For Emily. For answers. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered another chamber. This, one smaller and more claustrophobic. The walls were smooth and damp, and the floor was littered with bones. Animal bones, judging by their size and shape. Laura swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep moving. Near the far wall, they found another journal, its cover cracked and brittle. Daniel picked it up, flipping through the pages carefully. Most of it was illegible, but one passage caught his attention. "The keeper is here. It watches us, it knows we're here. Ethan says we have to bargain with it, but I don't know how." "The keeper?" Laura repeated, her voice trembling. "What does that mean?" Daniel frowned. "It sounds like they thought there was some kind of entity down here. Maybe they believed it was keeping them trapped." Laura shook her head, refusing to accept it. "That doesn't make sense. There has to be a logical explanation." But as they explored further, the evidence began to pile up. Strange noises echoed through the chamber, scratching, skittering sounds that seemed to come from everywhere, and nowhere at once. Shadows danced along the walls, shifting unnaturally even when neither Laura nor Daniel moved. And then, there were the whispers. Faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the sound of dripping water, but growing louder and clearer the longer they stayed. Words slipped in and out of focus, too fast to catch fully, but Laura swore she heard her daughter's name among them. "We need to leave," Daniel said urgently. "This isn't safe." "No," Laura insisted. "We can't leave yet. Not until we find Emily." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but before he could say anything, the ground beneath them trembled slightly. A low rumble filled the chamber, reverberating through the walls and shaking loose rocks from the ceiling. Laura stumbled, catching herself against the wall. Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light across the room. When it steadied, she saw something that made her blood run cold. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden in the shadows, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its body impossibly elongated, with limbs that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, and its eyes, glowing, hollow eyes, stared directly at them. Laura froze, her breath catching in her throat. The figure didn't move, but she could feel its presence pressing down on her, suffocating her Don't look at it, Daniel hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her back. Just move. Slowly. They backed away, their flashlights trembling in their hands. The figure remained still, its gaze fixed on them. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Laura's mind raced, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. Was this the keeper the journal had mentioned? Was it real, or was it some trick of the cave's eerie atmosphere? She didn't know, and she didn't want to find out. As they reached the spiral staircase, the tremors grew stronger. Rocks fell from the ceiling, narrowly missing them as they scrambled upward. Laura's legs burned with effort, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind them, the figure stepped into the light, revealing more of its grotesque form. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. The whispers turned into voices now, overlapping, and chaotic screaming words that made no sense. When they finally reached the top of the staircase, Laura collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Daniel quickly blocked the entrance with a fallen rock, though he knew it wouldn't hold for long. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." Laura nodded, forcing herself to stand. Her body ached and her mind was reeling, but she refused to give up. Not yet. Somewhere in this maze of tunnels, her daughter might still be alive. And if there was even the slightest chance of finding her, Laura would face whatever horrors this cave held. Because after 15 years of searching, she was closer than ever to the truth. And nothing, not even the keeper, was going to stop her. Laura Dawson and Daniel Carter didn't stop running until they were far away from the spiral staircase. Their breaths came in ragged gasps, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they stumbled through the tunnels. The air was thick with panic, and every sound, the drip of water, the creak of shifting rocks, felt like a warning. Behind them, the tremors continued, shaking the ground beneath their feet. It was as if the cave itself was alive, angry at their intrusion. Laura clutched her flashlight tightly, its beam cutting through the darkness but doing little to ease her fear. Her mind replayed the image of the figure, the keeper, with its hollow eyes and unnatural movements. She couldn't shake the feeling that it was still watching them, even now, even as they fled deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels. The whispers followed them too, faint but persistent, like voices carried on the wind. They spoke in fragments, words she couldn't quite understand, but one phrase kept repeating over and over. "You shouldn't be here." Daniel slowed down, his face pale and drawn. "We need to find another way out," he said, his voice strained. "If we go back the way we came, it'll catch us." Laura nodded, though her heart sank. The thought of being trapped in this maze without an exit terrified her, but giving up wasn't an option. Somewhere in these caves, her daughter might still be alive. She had come too far to turn back now. They pressed onward, following the faint glow of bioluminescent moss that lined the walls. The light was eerie, casting strange shadows that danced across the rocky surfaces. Every step felt heavier than the last, as if the cave was trying to slow them down. Laura's legs burned with exhaustion, and her lungs ached from the cold, damp air, but she forced herself to keep moving. She focused on the sound of her own breathing, trying to block out the whispers and the memories of the keeper's gaze. After what felt like hours, they reached a fork in the tunnel. Two paths stretched before them, both narrow and dark. Daniel hesitated, shining his flashlight down each one. "Which way?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Laura stepped forward, examining the walls for any signs left by the teens. She found nothing at first, but then her flashlight caught something, a faint scratch etched into the rock. It was one of the symbols they had seen earlier, the spiral surrounded by jagged lines. "This way," she said, pointing to the left path. "It's a marker. They went this way." Daniel nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. "Let's hope they knew what they were doing." The tunnel sloped downward, leading them deeper into the earth. The air grew colder and the walls became smoother, almost polished. Laura noticed more carvings along the way, some of them matching the symbols they had seen before, while others were unfamiliar. One carving depicted a group of stick figures standing in a circle, their heads tilted upward as if staring at something in the sky. Another showed a figure with elongated arms reaching toward a spiral shape. The images sent a chill down her spine, but she didn't stop to examine them closely. Time was running out. As they moved forward, the tunnel opened into a large chamber. This one was different from the others. It was vast, with a high ceiling that disappeared into darkness. The floor was covered in a fine layer of dust, and scattered across it were remnants of the teen's journey. Scraps of clothing, broken equipment, and even a few pages torn from notebooks. Laura knelt beside one of the pages, her hands trembling, as she read the faded writing. It was a list of names: Ethan, Lucas, Emily, Olivia, Ryan, followed by a series of dates. Beneath the names, someone had written, "We're still alive. We're waiting." "Waiting for what?" Laura whispered, her voice cracking. "What were they waiting for?" Daniel didn't answer. He was busy examining the far wall where a massive carving dominated the space. It was a spiral, just like the ones they had seen before, but this one was enormous, stretching from the floor to the ceiling. At its center was a dark opening, wide enough for a person to crawl through. Around the spiral were smaller carvings, figures with hollow eyes, clawed hands, and twisted bodies. The sight made Laura's stomach churn. "This must be it," Daniel said quietly. "Whatever they were looking for or running from, it's through there." Laura stared at the opening, her heart pounding. She wanted to turn back, to leave this cursed place behind and never return. But she couldn't, not without answers, not without Emily. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Let's go." The passage beyond the spiral was tight and suffocating, forcing them to crawl on their hands and knees. The air smelled stale and the walls were slick with moisture. Laura's flashlight flickered, casting erratic beams of light that made the shadows seem to writhe and twist. She could hear Daniel behind her, his breathing labored, but neither of them spoke. There was no need for words. They both knew the stakes. Finally, the passage opened into another chamber, smaller and more enclosed than the others. In the center of the room stood a makeshift campsite, littered with decaying supplies and remnants of survival attempts. Blankets were spread across the ground, and empty cans lay scattered around. Laura's eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of life. And then she saw it. A figure curled up in the corner, thin and gaunt with matted hair and sunken eyes. "Emily?" Laura whispered, her voice trembling. The figure stirred, lifting its head slowly. For a moment, Laura thought she was mistaken. The face was too thin, too worn to belong to her daughter. But then the figure spoke, its voice hoarse and weak. "Mom?" Laura dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She reached out, pulling Emily into her arms. Her daughter felt fragile, like she might break if held too tightly, but Laura didn't care. After 15 years of searching, of wondering, of hoping against hope, she had finally found her. "I'm here," she said, her voice breaking. "I'm here, sweetheart." Emily clung to her, sobbing quietly. "I thought you'd never come." Laura pulled back slightly, examining her daughter's face. Emily looked older, her features hardened by years of hardship, but there was still a glimmer of the girl she remembered. "What happened?" Laura asked gently. "Where are the others?" Emily's expression darkened. She glanced toward the far corner of the chamber, where two skeletons lay side by side. Their remains were partially covered by blankets, but there was no mistaking who they were. "Lucas and Olivia," Emily whispered. "They didn't make it." Laura's heart sank. She turned to Daniel, who was standing silently near the entrance, his face pale. "And Ethan and Ryan?" she asked. Emily hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. They left weeks ago. Said they couldn't stay anymore. I told them not to go, but they wouldn't listen. I think the keeper got them." "The keeper?" Daniel repeated, his voice low. "What is it?" Emily shook her head. I don't know. It's always been here, watching us, waiting. Sometimes it speaks to you, whispers things in your ear. It tells you to leave, to run, but you can't. You try, but it won't let you go. Laura felt a chill run down her spine. She wanted to ask more, to understand what this thing was, but there was no time. The tremors were growing stronger, shaking the walls and sending loose rocks tumbling to the ground. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent than before. Laura tightened her grip on Emily. "We have to get out of here," she said firmly. "Now." Emily nodded, though fear lingered in her eyes. "It won't let us leave," she whispered. "Not unless we bargain with it." "Bargain?" Daniel asked, his voice sharp. "What does that mean?" "I don't know," Emily cried. "Ethan said we had to offer it something, but I don't know what." Laura's mind raced. Whatever the keeper was, whatever it wanted, she wasn't going to let it take her daughter again. Turning to Daniel, she said, "We need to find another way out. There has to be one." Daniel nodded, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Together they helped Emily to her feet and began retracing their steps. The tremors grew worse and the whispers turned into screams, echoing through the tunnels like a chorus of lost souls. Laura focused on the sound of her own breathing, clutching Emily's hand tightly. She wasn't going to lose her again, not after coming this far. As they reached the spiral carving, Laura paused, glancing back at the dark opening they had crawled through. For a moment she thought she saw movement, a shadow shifting in the darkness, but she didn't wait to find out. Pushing forward, she led the group into the main chamber, where the bioluminescent moss cast an eerie glow over everything. "We're close," Daniel said, his voice urgent. "Just a little further." But as they approached the exit, the ground beneath them gave way. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, blocking their path. Laura froze, her heart pounding. The whispers surrounded them louder than ever, and the air grew colder. She turned to see the keeper standing at the edge of the chamber, its hollow eyes fixed on them. "It's here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. Laura stepped in front of her daughter, shielding her from view. Whatever the keeper wanted, it wasn't going to take her family without a fight. The keeper stood at the edge of the chamber, its elongated form casting a shadow that seemed to stretch endlessly across the walls. Its hollow eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, and its movements were slow but deliberate, as if it had all the time in the world. The whispers grew louder, swirling around Laura Dawson, Daniel Carter, and Emily like a storm of voices. Each word was sharp and cold, cutting through their thoughts. They spoke of fear, of loss, of choices they didn't want to make. Laura stepped forward, her body trembling but her voice steady. "Leave us alone," she said, her words echoing through the chamber. "We're leaving." The keeper tilted its head almost curiously, as though it hadn't expected her to speak. For a moment the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then one voice rose above the others, a low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It wasn't human, not entirely, but it carried a tone of mockery, as if it found their defiance amusing. "You cannot leave," the voice said, reverberating through the chamber. "You belong here now." Emily clung to her mother's arm, her face pale and her eyes wide with terror. "Mom, please," she whispered. "It's lying. It wants us to stay." Laura tightened her grip on Emily's hand. She wouldn't let go. Not again. Not ever. Turning to Daniel, she asked, "Is there another way out? Any way at all?" Daniel shook his head, his face grim. "The tunnels are collapsing. This is the only path left." The keeper took a step closer, its movements fluid and unnatural. The ground beneath them trembled and rocks fell from the ceiling, narrowly missing them. Laura glanced back at the blocked exit, then at the keeper. Her mind raced, searching for a solution. If they couldn't fight their way out and they couldn't bargain, what other choice did they have? "Why are you doing this?" Laura demanded, her voice rising. "What do you want from us?" The keeper paused, tilting its head again. "A price must be paid," it said, its voice low and menacing. "For entering this place, for disturbing what should remain hidden." A price? Daniel repeated, his voice shaking. What kind of price? The keeper didn't answer. Instead, it extended one of its impossibly long arms, pointing toward Emily. Laura instinctively pulled her daughter behind her, shielding her with her body. You're not taking her, she said firmly. If anyone has to pay, it's me. The whispers erupted again, louder than before. They swirled around Laura, filling her mind with images, memories of her life before Emily disappeared, moments of joy and pain, love and regret. She saw herself waving goodbye to her daughter on the day of the hike, saw the empty years that followed, felt the weight of every sleepless night and unanswered prayer. And then she heard a voice, soft and clear amidst the chaos. It wasn't the keeper's voice. It was Emily's. Mom, don't, Emily pleaded, tears streaming down her face. You can't give yourself to it. I won't let you. Laura turned to look at her daughter, her heart breaking at the sight of her. Emily looked so fragile, so broken, yet there was a strength in her eyes that hadn't been there before. 15 years in the cave had changed her, hardened her, but it hadn't taken away her spirit. Laura realized then that she couldn't save Emily by sacrificing herself. If they were going to survive, they would have to face the keeper together. Taking a deep breath, Laura turned back to the keeper. We didn't ask to come here, she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. We didn't mean to disturb anything, but we're leaving now and you're not stopping us. The keeper's hollow eyes narrowed, and the whispers turned into a deafening roar. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, and the ground shook violently. Laura grabbed Emily's hand, pulling her toward the blocked exit. Daniel followed close behind, using his flashlight to scan the rubble for a way through. The keeper moved faster now, its elongated limbs stretching toward them, its presence overwhelming. We need to dig, Daniel shouted, dropping to his knees and clawing at the rocks. Laura joined him, her hands scraping against the rough surface. Every movement sent jolts of pain through her fingers, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind them, the keeper loomed closer, its shadow engulfing the chamber. Hurry! Emily cried, her voice cracking with desperation. Laura worked frantically, tossing rocks aside as quickly as she could. Her muscles burned and her breath came in ragged gasps, but she refused to give up. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they cleared enough debris to create a small opening. Daniel went first, squeezing through the gap and reaching back to help Emily. Laura followed, her body scraping against the jagged edges of the tunnel. Once they were through, they ran, their flashlights bouncing wildly as they stumbled through the darkness. The tremors continued, shaking the ground beneath their feet, but they didn't stop. They couldn't. The keeper's voice echoed behind them, growing fainter with each step. But the whispers lingered, whispering promises of despair and doom. When they finally reached the spiral staircase, Laura hesitated. Going back meant facing the keeper again, but staying in the caves meant certain death. Taking a deep breath, she led the group downward, praying they would find another exit before the keeper caught up to them. At the bottom of the staircase, they entered a new chamber, smaller and more enclosed than the others. In the center of the room stood a massive stone structure, covered in carvings that matched the ones they had seen earlier. At its base was a dark crevice, wide enough for a person to crawl through. Laura's heart sank. It was another dead end. No, she whispered, her voice trembling. There has to be another way. Daniel examined the crevice closely, shining his flashlight into the darkness. This might lead outside, he said, though doubt lingered in his voice. But it's risky. We don't know what's down there. Laura looked at Emily, who nodded weakly. Let's try it, she said. Anything's better than staying here. They crawled into the crevice, the air growing colder with each passing moment. The walls were slick with moisture and the sound of dripping water echoed through the narrow passage. Laura focused on the sound of her own breathing, trying to block out the whispers that followed them. After what felt like hours, they emerged into a larger tunnel, the faint glow of daylight visible in the distance. We are almost there, Daniel said, his voice filled with relief. But as they approached, The exit, the ground beneath them, gave way once more. Rocks tumbled from the ceiling, blocking their path. Laura froze, her heart pounding. The keeper's voice echoed through the tunnel, louder and clearer than before. "You cannot escape," it said, its tone mocking. "This is your home now." Laura turned to face the keeper, her body trembling but her resolve unshaken. She wouldn't let it win. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, shielding Emily and Daniel with her body. "If you want us," she said, her voice steady, "you'll have to take all of us." The keeper hesitated, its hollow eyes glowing brighter. For a moment, the whispers stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Then slowly it began to retreat, melting into the shadows until it disappeared completely. The tremors ceased, and the whispers faded, leaving only the sound of their breathing. Laura collapsed onto the ground, tears streaming down her face. They had made it. Against all odds, they had survived. As they crawled through the final stretch of the tunnel and emerged into the bright sunlight, Laura felt a wave of relief wash over her. The world above was waiting for them, and for the first time in 15 years she felt truly hopeful. Whatever the keeper was, whatever it wanted, it hadn't won. Not today. The sunlight hit Laura Dawson's face like a warm embrace, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe freely. She stumbled out of the cave with Emily clinging to her side, both of them covered in dirt and exhaustion. Daniel followed close behind, his face pale but relieved. The world outside was alive. Birds chirped in the distance, leaves rustled in the breeze, and the sky stretched endlessly above them. It was a stark contrast to the suffocating darkness they had just escaped. For a moment, none of them spoke. They simply stood there, letting the fresh air fill their lungs and the warmth of the sun soak into their skin. Laura looked down at Emily, her daughter's gaunt face streaked with tears and grime. Despite everything, she was here, alive. Laura pulled her into a tight hug, holding her as if she might disappear again if she let go. "You're safe now," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're safe." Emily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, sobbing quietly. "I thought I'd never see you again," she said, her voice hoarse. "I thought I'd be stuck, down there forever." Laura stroked her daughter's hair, her own tears streaming down her face. "I'm never letting you go again," she promised. "Never." Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the silence. "We need to get back to town," he said gently. "You both need rest, and medical attention." Laura nodded, though the thought of moving felt overwhelming. Her legs ached, her hands were raw from digging through rocks, and her mind was still reeling from everything they had endured. But she knew Daniel was right. They couldn't stay here. Not yet. Taking a deep breath, she helped Emily to her feet and began walking toward the reservoir where they had left their supplies. As they trudged across the dried-up basin, Laura couldn't help but glance over her shoulder at the mouth of the cave. It loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding, as if it were watching them leave. She shivered, despite the warmth of the sun. The keeper was gone for now, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't truly defeated. Something about the way it had retreated, fading into the shadows without a fight, unsettled her. It felt less like a victory, and more like a temporary reprieve. When they reached the edge of the reservoir, they found a group of volunteers who had been searching the area. One of them spotted them immediately and called out, waving frantically. Within moments, people were rushing toward them, their faces filled with shock and disbelief. Laura barely registered their questions or the commotion around her. All she cared about was getting Emily to safety. An ambulance arrived shortly after, its siren cutting through the quiet morning. Paramedics helped Emily onto a stretcher, wrapping her in blankets and checking her vitals. Laura refused to leave her side, even as the medics urged her to sit down and rest. "I'm fine," she insisted, her voice firm. "Just take care of her." On the ride to the hospital, Laura held Emily's hand tightly, her mind replaying everything that had happened. The whispers, the symbols, the keeper. It all felt like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. But Emily was real. Her daughter was alive, and that was enough to keep her grounded. For now. At the hospital, doctors examined Emily thoroughly, treating her for malnutrition and dehydration. They marveled at her survival, calling it a miracle. Laura sat by her bedside, watching as her daughter slept peacefully for the first time in years. She wanted to believe it was over, that they could put the horrors of the cave behind them, and start anew. But deep down she knew better. The keeper wasn't gone. It was still out there, waiting. That night, after Emily had fallen asleep, Laura returned home. Her house felt strange, almost foreign after so many years of living in emptiness. She wandered through the rooms, her footsteps echoing softly. Everything was exactly as she had left it. The books on the shelves, the photos on the walls, the furniture covered in thin layers of dust. It was as if time had stood still while she waited for her daughter to come back. In Emily's room, Laura paused, running her fingers over the familiar objects. The bed was neatly made, the curtains drawn, the stuffed animals sitting patiently on the shelves. She sank onto the edge of the bed, tears welling up in her eyes. 15 years. 15 long, agonizing years of wondering, hoping, and fearing the worst. And now, against all odds, Emily was home. But the peace didn't last long. As the days passed, Laura began to notice changes in her daughter. Emily was quieter than before, her eyes often distant as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. At night, Laura would wake up to find Emily standing by the window, staring out into the darkness. When asked what was wrong, Emily would shake her head and say nothing was bothering her. But Laura knew better. One evening, Laura decided to confront her. Sitting beside Emily on the couch, she asked gently, "What's going on? You can tell me." Emily hesitated, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "It's the whispers," she admitted finally. "They're still there, in my head." Laura's heart sank. "What do they say?" Emily shook her head. "I don't know. Sometimes it's just noise like static. Other times, it feels like it's trying to tell me something, like it wants me to go back." Laura wrapped her arms around her daughter, pulling her close. "You're not going back," she said firmly. "Whatever it is, it can't hurt you anymore. You're safe here." But Emily didn't look convinced. "It's not done with me," she whispered. "It won't ever be done." Laura wanted to argue, to reassure her daughter that everything would be okay, but she couldn't deny the truth. The keeper had marked them, claimed them in some way. It might have let them go this time, but it wouldn't forget. She knew that as surely as she knew her own name. Determined to protect her family, Laura sought out answers. She visited libraries, scoured old books and records, and spoke to local historians about the legends surrounding the Hollow Mountain. What she learned chilled her to the bone. According to the stories, the cave system had been considered sacred by Native American tribes long before settlers arrived. They believed it was a gateway to another realm, guarded by spirits that punished intruders who dared to enter. Some claimed the keeper was one such spirit, an ancient entity that fed on fear and despair. Armed with this knowledge, Laura realized they couldn't simply move on and pretend the past hadn't happened. If the keeper was real, if it truly existed, then they needed to find a way to seal the gateway permanently. Otherwise, it would continue to haunt them, drawing others into its grasp just as it had drawn the teens 15 years ago. With Daniel's help, Laura devised a plan. Using information from the legends, they gathered items needed for a ritual meant to close the gateway: salt, herbs, and symbols etched into stone, all designed to weaken the keeper's hold on the cave. It was risky, dangerous even, but Laura refused to let fear stop her. If this was the only way to ensure her family's safety, then she would do whatever it took. On the day of the ritual, Laura, Daniel, and Emily returned to the reservoir. The cave entrance loomed before them, darker and more menacing than ever. Laura felt a pang of dread as they approached, but she pushed it aside. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about protecting Emily. and everyone else who might stumble upon the cursed place. Inside the cave, they set up the ritual, placing salt circles and lighting candles infused with protective herbs. Laura recited the words she had memorized, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. The air grew colder, and the whispers returned, louder and angrier than before. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting and writhing as if alive. Then, suddenly the ground shook violently, and the keeper emerged from the darkness, its hollow eyes blazing with fury. "You dare defy me?" it roared, its voice shaking the very earth beneath their feet. Laura stood her ground, clutching the symbol, etched into a stone. "This ends now," she said, her voice unwavering. "You won't hurt anyone else." The keeper lunged toward them, its elongated limbs stretching impossibly far. But before it could reach them, Laura completed the final step of the ritual, slamming the stone onto the ground. A blinding light erupted, filling the chamber and driving the keeper back. Its screams echoed through the tunnels, growing fainter and fainter until they faded completely. When the light dimmed, the cave fell, silent. The whispers were gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. Laura sank to her knees, tears streaming down her face. It was over, finally. Truly over. In the weeks that followed, life in Pine Ridge slowly returned to normal. Emily began to heal, the whispers fading from her mind as the days passed. Laura threw herself into rebuilding their lives, determined to make up for the years they had lost. Though scars remained, both visible and invisible, they were learning to live again. The keeper was sealed away, its power broken. But Laura knew better than to forget the lessons they had learned. The world was full of mysteries, some too dangerous to uncover. And while the hollow mountain might be silent for now, its secrets would always linger, waiting for the next curious soul to wander too far into the darkness.